Today I went to the Tulsa Comic Con and was absolutely shocked by the fact that I was able to find a ton of video games. So come along with me and check out some of the really crazy stuff that I was just not expecting to find. So let's go ahead and head into the Tulsa Comic Con here, put on by my buddy Nick. Shout out to him. He does an awesome job every time he puts this on. I ended up stopping at this booth because there was a bunch of comics that kind of jumped out to me. And to the right of me, you could see there was like this mystery box, like postal box with a bunch of keys where you could pick things, which I thought was pretty cool. And then when I stopped and turned around the corner, I noticed they had this really small CRT. It was a DVD instead of a VHS player, so I left that behind, unfortunately. And then I continued on where I made my way to the Collector's Conquest booth, where he ended up having two awesome games. First off, he had Castlevania Bloodlines here for the Sega Genesis, and as well as Super Ghouls and Ghosts that he ended up selling to me for the Super Nintendo. He ended up selling this to me for only $10, which is an absolutely awesome deal. When I saw this, I was like, okay, I'm going to try to pick that up. And when I saw how much this was going for, I knew I was going to have to grab it. Now, if that Castlevania Bloodlines was cheaper, maybe I would have, but for $150, I already have the game complete, so I didn't need it, so I left that behind. And then I continued on to this next booth, which was my buddy Eric Mers from the Oklahoma Gaming Frenzy, and he had a ton of awesome new stuff that he didn't have at RetroFest. I ended up finding this little Bowser figure that I ended up grabbing. My wife found a little Daisy figure, as well as Eric showed me these awesome patches. There was a Bowser and Peach one, and then a single Mario one and a single Luigi one, plus a bunch of different little Zelda ones as well. I grabbed a Link, obviously, and then I made my way to the booth where he had all his games. He had PlayStation 4 games, which this is a great game, but unfortunately, they kind of shut it down, sadly. Great game, but it got a bad treatment. Then I got to the PS5 games and found Bang On Balls. I'm just gonna let that sit with you. That's a terrible name for a game. Then I found right next to that Ugly Dolls for the PS4. I'm just finding some really funny name games here. Then he had this awesome Zelda book set, which told you pretty much everything about it, and right next to that he said, hey, come look at this. And that's when he started pulling out promotional item after promotional item after promotional item, which was totally awesome. He pulled out some Rubik's Cubes, some Nintendo Switch sports stuff, even a PlayStation 4 controller alarm clock. Yeah, if you see these right here, those are actually Pokemon underwear, which is just hilarious. He found some cool, like, postcards and stuff like that, which I definitely looked through and might have gotten something. You'll just have to wait to see exactly what I got. Then he showed me this Zelda bag and pulled out this interesting Kirby like napkin, which right off the bat, you know, once I saw that, I had to look at that, and honestly, I grabbed that. Then he just kept pulling more and more and more cool stuff out of his little bag that had a bunch of promotional stuff. Like you see that Kirby and the Forgotten Land bag there. And then he pulled out some more stuff like Pokemon, Splatoon stuff. Some really cool, interesting stuff that honestly you don't see very much, if at all. I did end up grabbing this Kirby one. That was so cool. He ended up showing me a few more things here and there, like some Mario glasses, an NES controller pillow plushie thing, this Splatoon X Pokemon keychain set. These things looked pretty cool, but honestly, I don't know what I would do with them, so I ended up leaving those behind. He then showed me these awesome Nintendo NES cartridge coasters, like cup holder coasters, which I thought was pretty cool. And then we kind of talked a little bit more. Obviously, you can see that Kirby caught my eye. That Zelda bag was really cool, but honestly, I didn't really need that. And then he had a bunch of just like random knickknacks, like a Mario Kart Wii bag. I think that was a Pokemon Snap, just a little Switch screen cleaner, a little Mario and Rabbids Kingdom Battle Star thing. I mean, there was some really cool stuff. I think this was Pokemon related, but I couldn't really tell. It was hard to see kind of what it was supposed to be. I think it like suctioned to your phone on the back and was like a thing where you put your finger in to kind of hold it. I think that's what it was, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, because some of this stuff I had never seen before. Some awesome coloring pencils and just some more weird and wacky cool stuff that anytime I see stuff like that, I obviously got to stop and look. I looked at the Wii U games, and then the Switch games, and then the Nintendo 64 games after we talked about all the promotional items. Made my way over to the left here to the Super Nintendo games, where I actually ended up finding a game that I saw on his table, and I was stoked to find. This is King of Monsters 2, which this thing, I looked it up, looks absolutely wild. Cannot wait to play that. Then we've got a bunch of NES games, some DS games, some 3DS games, even some PS1 games here. He had a lot of good stuff that he recently picked up in like the last 2 weeks, so that was a perfect time for me to stop there. Then I got to the PSP games, where I ended up finding this Mortal Kombat Unchained. I don't have this, so I went ahead and grabbed that. And then I kind of started moving along past that pretty quickly, and that's when Eric stopped me and was like, hey, did you see this game? And I was like, no, what is this? This is called Deadhead Fred. And we ended up talking for a little bit, and he said, this is actually a game where you trade heads once you kind of kill someone. You gain their powers by taking their head, which is just crazy. And obviously, you know I had to pick that up because I like weird and wacky games. But then I kept looking through his booth here, made my way to the Sega Genesis games, the box games here, and then I found a complete inbox, King of Monsters, Part 2, and this is actually the game I got, just the loose cartridge. I would like to have this in my collection, but for the time being, I think I'm just gonna grab the loose cartridge because this game looks like a game that I'll definitely enjoy. So then I put that back and kind of kept looking through his booth here to see if there was anything else that I absolutely had to have here. Now, I kind of made my way back and was looking through the Sega Genesis games a little bit because I was distracted, but then I made my way up to this top box over here and was kind of checking out a little bit, and that is when I made my way over to where the PS3 games and the kind of Xbox 360 games here. I found a few that were definitely interesting to me, but nothing I absolutely had to have. Honestly, I thought about picking up this Never Dead game, but I think I would rather have this on the Xbox 360 if I'm being completely honest. So I set that aside, and then I ended up finding this Uncharted dual pack, which is always awesome to have. I actually have this in my collection, but anytime I can see a PlayStation 2 or 3 dual pack, I always at least look at it a little bit there. And speaking of dual packs, I was just talking about that. And then I saw this Xbox 360 Skyrim and BioShock Infinite one, and I was like, okay, this is $20. I pulled it out, looked at it. BioShock Infinite is actually still sealed, so I had to grab that. I set it down here for just a second while I kept looking, but I went back and grabbed it after I was done filming here. And then I made my way to this little stand where he had a bunch of awesome cool stuff up at the bottom. His booth was really small here, so I was kind of really cramped once it started to get busy because I've been here for a few minutes and found some really cool stuff. I kind of looked a little bit, and then I noticed to the right on the ground were even more games, so I ended up looking through the Xbox original games he had here. He had a bunch of them, and I'm sorry it's a little dark. It was really hard to see down here because of the lighting, but it is what it is. I ended up thinking about packing this or grabbing this, but I ended up passing on it. Checked out the Wii games and ultimately made my decision and got all of this stuff plus a few others here, so we'll talk about it all. The first thing that caught my eye was this bin full of random figures. I love to pick up figures, and I don't have this figure. This is the Mario Kart one with Bowser on it, with the exchangeable or you can go from the wheels to the hover. So I ended up grabbing this one and put the wheels on it and ended up picking that up. And then my wife wanted to pick up this daisy. Now this daisy is actually from the Mario like chess set. So this is the bishop, but she ended up wanting that. And then you saw Eric bring out all that cool promotional stuff. I ended up grabbing this Kirby. I think this is like a screen cleaner napkin. Honestly, it's in Japanese, so I don't know too much about it. But he also brought out this My Nintendo Kirby in the Forgotten Land. I think this is just like a bag of some sort. It looks like there's something in it, and I'll have to look this up because I'm not quite sure what it was, but anything Kirby in the Forgotten Land, I'm going to grab. And as well as I ended up grabbing these postcards. Now, these were from the Switch Online when the Nintendo 64 dropped. And obviously, you could see right off the bat, there's a Mario Party 2. I'm not going to open this up for now. Maybe I will in the future, but I saw this and had to grab that. As well as all of these patches. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Some of these patches I ended up buying from one of my friends, but I ended up getting a bunch of these Mario ones, a bunch of these Luigi ones, and I think 2 packages of the Bowser and Peach ones. These things were totally awesome. I think these came out with the My Nintendo stuff, but it doesn't say when or anything on the bags themselves. But I saw these and I'm like, okay, those are so cool. I've got to grab them. And then, honestly, this Zelda Link one looked pretty lame. So I only grabbed one of them. I wish this looked cooler. There was so much room for potential, and yeah, this just fell flat, especially compared to these that were right next to it. So I saw those and I had to grab them. And then we've got the games themselves. I got King of Monsters 2. I looked this game up while I was there. This looks like it's going to be absolutely awesome, and probably what I'm going to end up playing this weekend because I'm excited about this. But then my wife looked through the little kind of Nintendo Switch section where she ended up grabbing a few, I think one of these is a limited run game, and that ended up being Skeletak, which I thought looked pretty awesome. She will probably definitely enjoy that. Then she ended up grabbing Neon City Riders, which looks kind of awesome. Oh, this is a limited run game as well. And last but not least, she ended up getting a Galgun double piece here. This is not a limited run game, but it is still sealed, so she's probably gonna have to open this up if she wants to play it. And then, like I said, I found these 2 PSP games. I found this Mortal Kombat game and was like, okay, I've never actually played this, so I've got to grab that. And while I was standing there, Eric was like, hey, did you see this game? It's absolutely crazy. And so I pulled it out and I was like, I saw the game, but I didn't know anything about it, so I passed on it. And then he told me that it was a game where you take other people's heads, which means you get their superpowers. And I was like, sold. I'm getting this. I was like, you pretty much upsold me with this game, but honestly, this is a game that I'm definitely going to enjoy, and probably one of the games I'm going to play next after I play that King of Monsters game. And then, last but not least, I think from his booth was this dual pack Skyrim and BioShock Infinite for the Xbox 360. This thing is absolutely insane. I love, like I said, finding dual packs, and for 20 bucks, I knew I just had to grab this one. So then I continued through this Comic-Con. Honestly, I wasn't looking for comic books, but rather video games, as you know, and I saw this Guitar Hero and then turned to the right and saw a stack of DS games. So of course, you knew I had to look through that. Then I ended up spotting this Pokemon White 2, which was absolutely insane. We'll talk about that in just a second. Then I kind of looked through this booth a little bit more. That Godzilla Unleashed caught my eye, but I've already got it, so I ended up passing on that. So I did end up going back and getting 2 DS games here. You can see them in my hand. I ended up grabbing a Pokemon Omega Ruby and Mario Kart DS. And then I asked about that Pokemon White 2, which was an authentic copy. He had it for 80 bucks, so of course you knew I had to grab it. That is a really good price. And then I ended up buying those 3 games from him. And then I took those games, and my buddy Richie was at this booth, and I said, hey, do you happen to know if this is real? I think it's real, but I asked him about it. We talked a little bit. He ended up checking it out. We did the whole light test and all that. He had this insane God of War standee, which I have my eye on, but we ended up talking about the Pokemon White 2, and he said it was real, and I thought it was too. I just wanted to double check with him, and I said, hey, I just found this at that booth over there for 80 bucks, and he was like, dude, that is such a great deal, and I was like, yeah, do you want to buy it? Because at this point, I spent most of my money, if not all of it. I still had a little bit left, but most of it at Eric's booth, I spent more than I was expecting, but I'm not upset about it by any means. But I said, hey, do you want to buy it? And he was like, how much? And I'm like, 100 bucks. So he ended up buying that for me, which is great because in a minute, you'll see I used that money and it benefited me greatly. So I ended up selling that to my buddy Richie. Shout out to him. I didn't get him on camera when we were doing it. I don't know what we were thinking, but it is what it is. I ended up picking that up and then immediately selling it to him, which I don't normally do, but in this instance, for the cash that I wanted in case I found something else, it was definitely well worth it. But I also ended up picking up Mario Kart DS here. They had it for 15 bucks, but I only ended up paying 10 bucks for it, I believe. And then I ended up getting Pokemon Omega Ruby here. I think I only ended up paying $20 instead of the $30. So these definitely ended up being great games to pick up for these prices. But there was still one more booth that I had to check out, and that was Brittany's booth, which is the Been There, Done There booth, which I've bought from before. And I checked out all of their games. I checked through the PlayStation 2, the PS3 games here. You see me kind of wander around. We talked for a little bit. I checked out the PS4 games. And then I continued on. I ended up finding a few cool demo disc games, but ultimately I have all of these in my collection. So I ended up putting these back. I was hoping it was something I didn't have, maybe like a God of War or something, but it unfortunately wasn't. Then I made my way to this last kind of box here. Over here, I made my way through the Xbox 360 games and a few PC games there, but then I turned to what's actually the last box, and that is when I found NBA Street for the GameCube over here. Now, this was missing the manual, but I don't actually have this for the GameCube, and I absolutely love this game, so I ended up grabbing that. I checked out the Wii games to see if there was anything else maybe that I was missing, the Xbox One, and whatever random games were in here. But then I turned the corner, and that's when I ended up finding this Odd World Adventures game for the Game Boy. And then right to the right of that, or to the left, I guess, was a Nintendo DS 2DS XL, which this is the black and turquoise one. And I wasn't sure if I was going to get that. This is where I found the Odd World Adventures. And I asked how much it would be. And then she said 10 bucks for the Game Boy game. And then 150 for the 2DS XL. So I ended up powering it on just to make sure everything worked. I knew it would, but I don't know what the instinct in me just to turn it on and make sure it was definitely there. So then I ended up grabbing that Odd World Adventures and NBA Street, which is perfect because if I wouldn't have sold that Pokemon game, I wouldn't have had enough money to buy this stuff, which is just really, really funny to me. First off, like you saw, I ended up paying for everything, and then I ended up going and getting this Odd World Adventures for the Game Boy. I have no clue about this, but it's a game that I'll probably at least play and have some fun with. I don't know if this is good or not, so I'll have to do some research there. Then, like I said, NBA Street here for the GameCube. I do not actually have this for the GameCube, which is kind of strange, but for 20 bucks, I had to pick this up. And like I said, last but not least was that 2DS XL. Now, when I went to buy it, she said, I actually have a better case in this bin over here if you want it. So we ended up swapping for this case, which is totally awesome. And the front there is actually where the power cord is, and then when you open it up is where the Nintendo 2DS XL is. And I already have the black and teal one, or black and turquoise one, which this one is. However, this one is in way better condition than the one I have. So ultimately, I grabbed this for myself to be able to switch out my older one. It's kind of beat up a little bit because I got it used, to be honest with you. So this is in really good condition. The screens on this are so clean. So I ended up grabbing this because I thought it was definitely well worth it. And I am so glad that I ended up selling that Pokemon game to my buddy Richie, because if I wouldn't have had the cash to buy this thing. So that was definitely well worth it. Part of me wishes that I would have kept it, but then again, it's going to a good friend. He's going to be able to do good with it. I ended up doing good with it, and I ended up getting something that I think I'll enjoy more. So I already have Pokemon White 2, so I have it complete. So I don't feel as bad getting rid of it. But normally when I get Pokemon games, they stay in my collection. This one, just for the sake of finding more stuff, didn't, which is perfectly okay. So there you had it. I got a bunch of awesome games at this Comic-Con, which I wasn't quite sure about. I knew there would be a few booths, but honestly, there ended up being a bunch more of games that I was just not expecting. So shout out to everyone I saw there. Shout out to Nick for putting this on. Absolutely awesome dude, and an awesome con that he puts together. Shout out to Richie, shout out to Eric and to Brittany, all those vendors that I ended up buying stuff from. Thanks for the hookup and the great deals. I found some crazy stuff that I was just not expecting, and I'm very glad that I did. And honestly, I found some really cool stuff. I think that King of Monsters 2 game for the Super Nintendo, after looking it up, I think I'm most excited about that. So enough about that. I gotta get out of here, so check that video out if you haven't already. But that PSP game, also Deadhead Fred, just looks absolutely insane, in a game that's gonna be right up my weird alley. So I'm definitely excited about that too. But enough about that. I gotta get out of here, so check that video out if you haven't already.